The death toll in Colombia has just climbed past 132 people, and it is still rising as rescue teams dig through what is left of collapsed buildings across western Colombia. At 7:34 this morning, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake, the strongest to hit this country this century, tore through the Choco Department. The shaking was felt by 34 million people across 4 countries. In Cali, a city of 2 million, a children's hospital lost 30% of its structure. 3 floors, including pediatrics and the neonatal unit, collapsed with patients still inside. Right now, hundreds of people remain trapped under rubble in at least 61 collapsed buildings. The aftershocks are already hitting, including multiple significant aftershocks, with at least 21 recorded in the hours that followed. This is not a contained disaster in a remote area. Something significant is happening. The damage is spread across multiple cities. The infrastructure meant to respond is itself compromised, and the numbers are climbing in real time. Today we are going to break down exactly how this earthquake unfolded, why it caused so much damage across such a wide area, and what the coming days could bring as aftershocks continue to threaten already weakened structures. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes for the millions of people living through this right now. If you have ever felt an earthquake, whether a small tremor or something more serious, you know that moment when the ground moves and your brain takes a second to understand what is happening. Have you ever experienced shaking strong enough to make you leave your building? Tell us about it in the comments. Subscribe now, because this is an unfolding situation. We will be tracking the aftershocks, the rescue efforts, and the full scope of the damage as new information comes in. The morning of August 10th, 2026 in Western Colombia began like any other Monday. People were commuting to work, dropping kids at school, opening shops, preparing for the week ahead. In the city of Cali, nurses were changing shifts at the hospital Universitario del Valle, one of the region's largest medical centers. In Pereira, airport staff were preparing for the first wave of morning flights. In Manizales, students were settling into their first classes of the day. At 7:34 a.m., that routine ended in seconds. The ground beneath the Choco Department began to move, and within moments, everything changed. Scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey recorded the event as a magnitude 7.4 on the moment magnitude scale. That is the standard measurement for earthquake size, and it tracks the total energy released by the rupture. To put that in perspective, a 7.4 releases an extraordinary amount of energy, enough to be detected by seismometers on every continent. It is not just a large earthquake. It is the strongest earthquake to hit Colombia this century, surpassing anything recorded in the country since modern seismic monitoring began. The epicenter, the point on the surface directly above the rupture, was located just 5 kilometers from San Jose del Palmar, a small town in a region known for its dense rainforest and steep river valleys. But the epicenter is only the starting point of the story. The true source of the shaking, the hypocenter, was 107 kilometers, or 66 miles underground. That depth is critical. It is deep enough to spread the seismic waves across a massive area, but shallow enough to still cause severe damage at the surface. Had the earthquake been shallower, say 20 or 30 kilometers deep, the destruction would have been far more concentrated and far more catastrophic. The energy would have hit the surface like a hammer striking an anvil. Instead, it spread out like ripples in a pond, carrying destruction across hundreds of kilometers. The movement itself was what geologists call strike-slip faulting. Imagine 2 massive blocks of earth sliding horizontally past each other, like 2 hands rubbing together sideways, but with the force of entire continents behind them. The Nazca Plate, which sits beneath the Pacific Ocean, is being pushed eastward against the South American Plate at a rate of roughly 7 centimeters per year. That is about the speed at which your fingernails grow, but when that movement is blocked for decades or centuries, the pressure builds, and when it finally releases, it does so all at once. That sudden slip generated the waves that traveled outward. The primary waves, or P waves, moved fastest, arriving first and causing the initial jolt. Then came the secondary waves, or S waves, which move more slowly but carry far more destructive energy. Finally, the surface waves arrived, rolling across the ground like ocean swells and causing the most severe damage to buildings and infrastructure. The USGS estimates that 34 million people were exposed to the shaking across 4 countries: Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, and Venezuela. That is more than the population of Canada. Of those, 10.5 million people experienced what is classified as strong to very strong shaking. That is measured on the modified Mercalli intensity scale, which runs from 1 to 12. At level 6, objects fall from shelves and furniture shifts. At level 7, walls crack and weak buildings suffer real structural damage. Even Bogotá, the capital, felt it. The city sits 280 kilometers, or 174 miles, from the epicenter. Despite that distance, buildings swayed and people evacuated into the streets. Office workers in high-rise towers described the sensation of being on a ship at sea, the floors rolling beneath their feet. The USGS issued an orange alert, its second highest warning level. That alert means significant casualties and widespread damage are likely. The agency did not mince words in its assessment. The data pointed to a disaster in the making. The alert was based on decades of seismic data, historical patterns, and the known vulnerabilities of the region's building stock. But the science only tells us how the ground moved. What it did to the cities above is another story. The city of Cali, home to 2 million people, took the heaviest blow. It is the third largest city in Colombia, a major industrial and commercial hub, and it sits on soft sedimentary soils that amplify seismic waves. When the shaking hit, the ground beneath Cali moved more violently than the surrounding bedrock, a phenomenon known as site amplification. Within minutes of the shaking stopping, the scale of the destruction became clear, and the worst of it was at a hospital full of patients. Mayor Alejandro Eder confirmed that at least 20 buildings collapsed in Cali alone. Among them was a major hospital. A full 30% of the structure gave way. 3 floors came down, including the pediatrics ward, internal medicine, and the neonatal unit. These were rooms filled with the most vulnerable patients, including newborn babies only days old, children recovering from surgery, and mothers who had just given birth. Rescue teams have so far pulled 4 people alive from the hospital rubble. The sounds of survivors calling for help are guiding the diggers, but progress is slow. Every shift of the debris risks another collapse. Every hour that passes reduces the chances of finding more people alive. Heavy machinery cannot be used because it might crush the people still trapped below. The damage is not limited to that one hospital. Across the region, 18 health centers have been damaged. Some have partial structural failures. Others have lost power or water. This is a cruel irony of earthquakes. The very facilities needed to treat mass casualties are themselves out of commission. Doctors are treating the injured in parking lots and on sidewalks. Medical staff are performing triage in the open air, using whatever supplies they could grab before the buildings became too dangerous to enter. Ambulances are being redirected to whatever structures remain standing. The official assessment paints a grim picture. Across western Colombia, more than 1,600 buildings are damaged. Of those, 61 have completely collapsed. The numbers break down further. 37 homes are completely destroyed, flattened beyond repair. Another 1,575 homes have significant damage, leaving families without safe shelter. That means thousands of people are now without safe shelter, sleeping in the streets and parks or in the few emergency shelters that remain operational. Save the Children has issued an alert about the specific risk to children. In a disaster like this, kids are the most vulnerable. They are more likely to be injured by falling debris, and they are more likely to be separated from their parents in the chaos. Rescue teams are working with limited resources. The roads to the worst-hit areas are damaged. The airports are damaged. The response is happening, but it is happening slower than it should. The president has declared a national disaster and deployed soldiers to assist, but they are racing against time and against the physical reality of a broken landscape. Every blocked road, every damaged runway, every downed power line is another obstacle between help and the people who need it. The devastation in Cali was the most visible, but it was far from the only place where buildings came down. The earthquake's destruction was never going to stay in one place. From its source 107 kilometers underground, the energy rippled outward in all directions. By the time it reached Pereira and Manizales, cities to the north and east, it had already decided the fate of hundreds of buildings. The seismic waves did not discriminate. They hit hospitals and schools, apartment blocks, and government buildings with equal force. In Pereira, a city of roughly 500,000 people, the death toll has reached 18, confirmed by Mayor Mauricio Salazar. The city's Maracana airport suffered a direct hit. The terminal ceiling collapsed, sending concrete and steel crashing down onto the departure area. Passengers who had been waiting for morning flights were suddenly trapped under debris. It is one of 6 regional airports damaged by the quake. That is a logistical nightmare. When a disaster strikes, you need to fly in supplies and rescue teams. Those runways are now partially blocked or closed entirely. The airport in Cali, the main hub for the region, also sustained damage, though it remains partially operational. The loss of air capacity means that heavy equipment, search and rescue dogs, and medical supplies must be transported by road, which is itself compromised. In Manizales, Mayor Jorge Eduardo Rojas confirmed 2 deaths. The city saw 17 buildings completely collapse and another 19 partially collapse. The difference between those 2 categories often comes down to a few seconds of shaking or a few centimeters of structural shifting. A building that survived the initial quake may still be standing, but it is not safe. Cracks in load-bearing walls, shifted foundations, and damaged support columns all mean that the next tremor could bring it down. Authorities in Manizales are going building by building, assessing which structures are safe to enter and which must be evacuated immediately. The infrastructure failures are compounding the tragedy. 18 major roads and highways are damaged. These are the arteries for rescue convoys, ambulances, and supply trucks. When those roads are blocked by landslides or cracked pavement, help cannot reach the people who need it most. In the mountainous terrain of western Colombia, landslides are a constant threat. The shaking loosens soil and rock on steep slopes, sending debris cascading onto roads below. In some areas, entire sections of highway have been swept away, leaving gaps that will take weeks to repair. 52 educational facilities are damaged. Schools and universities that should be sheltering people are instead too dangerous to enter. 17 community centers are damaged, reducing the capacity for emergency shelters just when thousands of people have lost their homes. The injury count has climbed past 570 people hospitalized across multiple cities. That number is expected to rise as rescuers dig deeper into the wreckage. Hospitals are reporting that they are overwhelmed, with patients being treated in hallways and any available space. The president has deployed soldiers to assist with rescue and recovery, but the soldiers face a brutal math problem. There are 61 collapsed buildings. There are hundreds of people missing, and there are only so many hours in a day to search before the chances of finding survivors drop dramatically. The first 24 hours after an earthquake are critical. After that, the survival rate drops sharply. After 48 hours, it is even lower. The soldiers know this. They are working as fast as they can, but they cannot be everywhere at once. The damage was already catastrophic, but the ground was not finished. The ground is not done moving. Aftershocks have already been recorded, with at least 21 recorded in the hours following the main event, including a confirmed magnitude 5.0 that struck less than an hour after the initial rupture. These are not minor tremors. They are hitting structures that were already weakened by the initial 7.4, adding more stress to cracked foundations and shifted walls. Every aftershock is a new threat. Buildings that survived the first quake are now standing on borrowed time. Cracks widened by the main shock can fail completely under the added stress of a second, third, or fourth tremor. Authorities are urging residents in damaged buildings to evacuate. They are telling people not to go back inside, even to grab belongings. The message is simple. Your life is worth more than your possessions. But for many people, the choice is not that simple. They have nowhere else to go. Their homes are damaged, but they are still standing. They are taking the risk because they have no other option. The USGS has calculated a 5% probability that an even larger earthquake will follow within 1 week. That is based on global data for this type of seismic event. 5% may sound small, but when you are standing in the rubble of a collapsed building and the ground starts shaking again, that 5% is a very real threat. The death toll trajectory tells the story of how this disaster is evolving. It started at 22 confirmed dead, then it climbed to 47, then 111. Now it is past 132 and still rising. Each update brings a higher number. Hundreds remain missing under the rubble. The final number will be higher. We just do not know yet how much higher. To understand what happens next, we have to look back at what this region has survived before. On January 25, 1999, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake struck the city of Armenia in Colombia's Coffee region. That quake killed approximately 1,900 people. It injured 8,500. It left 160,000 homeless. In Armenia alone, 907 people died. 60% of the buildings in the city were destroyed. Entire blocks of apartment buildings collapsed into piles of concrete and dust. The rescue effort took weeks, and the recovery took years. That 1999 earthquake was weaker than today's, much weaker. A 6.2 releases over 60 times less energy than a 7.4. Yet it killed far more people. The reason is depth and construction. The 1999 quake struck at a shallow 17 kilometers underground. The energy was concentrated in a small area directly above the fault. It hit unreinforced adobe and brick masonry buildings. Those structures had no steel frames to hold them together. They crumbled like sandcastles. They were built cheaply, quickly, and without regard for the seismic reality of the region. Today's 7.4 struck at 107 kilometers deep. The energy spread over a much wider area, and some building codes have improved since 1999. Colombia adopted stricter seismic design codes in the aftermath of the Armenia disaster, and those codes have saved lives. Newer buildings, particularly in larger cities like Cali and Pereira, were designed to withstand significant shaking. That is why the death toll, while tragic, is not yet at the level of the Armenia disaster. The lessons of 1999 were learned, and they are being applied today. But we are not out of the woods. The 1979 Tumaco earthquake, a magnitude 7.9, killed 259 people and generated a tsunami that swept the Pacific coast. The 1906 Ecuador-Colombia earthquake, estimated between magnitude 8.5 and 8.8, killed over 1,000 people with its tsunami. The history of this region is written in seismic events. The ground has moved here for millions of years, and it will continue to move long after we are gone. Colombia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. That is a horseshoe-shaped zone around the Pacific Ocean where most of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur. Here, three tectonic plates converge, the Nazca, the Caribbean, and the South American. These massive slabs of Earth's crust are constantly pushing against each other. The Nazca plate is subducting or sliding beneath the South American plate. The boundaries between these plates are zones of immense stress and pressure. When they slip, the ground shakes. Colombia experiences thousands of earthquakes every year, most too small to be felt. But when the pressure builds long enough, the release is catastrophic. Today was one of those days. The rescue phase is just beginning, and it is a race against time. Every hour that passes reduces the chances of finding survivors in the rubble. But the conditions are making that race brutally difficult. The heat and humidity of the region are taking a toll on both survivors and rescuers. We have 132 confirmed dead and 570 injured. Hundreds are missing. More than 1,600 buildings are damaged. 61 have collapsed completely. The response is happening, but it is happening against the clock and against the terrain. The 18 damaged health centers mean fewer beds for the wounded. The 18 damaged roads mean slower convoys. The 6 damaged airports mean fewer flights bringing in heavy equipment and search dogs. Every layer of the response is being slowed by the very disaster it is trying to address. It is a cruel feedback loop, and the people on the ground are feeling its effects with every passing hour. The USGS orange alert remains in effect. That is the second highest warning level in their global response system. It signals that significant casualties and economic losses are expected. The alert remains in place as the situation continues to evolve. Authorities are urging residents in damaged buildings to evacuate. They know that structures compromised by the initial quake are now far more vulnerable to collapse from aftershocks. The soldiers deployed by the president